Where were we? Oh, ring training, right. Let's do this shit. I just shared in a recent video where a beginner should spend most of his time and energy during training if he just bought a set of gymnastic rings. Think of the combination of these 4 exercises as a thick, sturdy roller. You're gonna use it most of the time when you decide to paint a house, but be sure that you're gonna come across tricky, difficult to reach areas where a thinner brush can and will do a much better job. This video covers the importance of the latter tool. In fitness language, all this means is that there are certain body functions that can be better trained through smaller exercises. These can address weak points and thus prevent the emergence of glaring lagging areas in the kinetic chain. The first area I'd be looking at is the scapular complex. By default, if you work in an office environment and you sit down all day long, I'm almost certain that your back is gonna be weak as f. In today's video, I'm only going to focus on how to strengthen the upper portion of the back, the scapular complex. Here, there is a bunch of different and smaller muscles that work synergistically when you train any type of pulling movements, such as rows or pull-ups. And that's great, but despite getting some degree of stimulus during these compound lifts, these smaller muscle groups in the upper back rarely get challenged to their full potential. That's where exercises like facepulls and reverse flies come into play. Both these isolation movements overload shoulder horizontal abduction, but facepulls in particular add an external rotation component. As a complete beginner, just pick one at the end of every workout and perform 2 sets of, let's say, 10 to 12 repetitions. Spend a few weeks or even months practicing the 2 movements on a regular basis, no matter how easy the sets might feel. The last thing you like to do is to ingrain poor technique, pollute it with major mechanical compensations coming from other muscle groups. Practice requires patience, and patience breeds discipline into the process, which is something that most people lack. In case you're overweight, not strong enough, or a combination of both, resistance bands could help you take off at the start. You could replicate the same movements without the need to get your body to travel across space if your own body is too much of a resistance for you to overcome. Cleaning up your nutrition and getting stronger at the basic compound movements I discussed in the first video of this series is your best chance of pulling off the transition from resistance bands to gymnastic rings. Once you are confident in your technique on both facepulls and reverse flies with gymnastic rings, make sure to increase the difficulty by adjusting your body angle very gradually into a more disadvantageous position. For those of you who are more interested in bodybuilding through calisthenics and ring training, the ultimate goal would be to include either movement in a superset with an exercise that primarily targets the anterior side of the body. Scapular-specific exercises like the ones I just showed you lend themselves very well to be paired with compound movements such as push-ups or dips. Or you could even implement more advanced accumulation methods such as a mechanical drop set, like in the 2 examples I share in this video. All in all, taking a more comprehensive approach to strengthening your scapular complex is a pretty smart thing to do to bulletproof your shoulders and to reduce the risk of injury as you get stronger over time. You should definitely experiment with rep ranges, but I personally like performing reverse flies and facepulls within 8 to 12 repetitions towards the end of my workouts. And yes, you could argue that regular flies performed with gymnastic rings for the chest could have a place in a training program for beginners. And since we're talking about ring training here, please do not forget that you get to do push-ups with a slightly more shoulder horizontal abduction, because now your arms are more freely to move, so you can do them with a little bit more of a flare, which could arguably give you a similar effect to that of regular flies. So I would much rather have a newbie client focus on getting stronger at ring push-ups, because that is going to allow him to get used to the sensation of the stretch at the bottom, which will condition his tendons and connective tissue to later on introduce regular flies in a much more safe manner. The second area of special focus in today's video is the arms. If you're interested in aesthetics, especially if you're a guy, there's no way around it. You want the big guns. The reason why arm-specific work is absolutely necessary almost from the get-go is that there is a similar dynamic here to what I just explained for the upper back. Yes, your biceps are engaged during pull-ups and rows, and there is no denying that the triceps play a key role in movements like push-ups and dips. But they are just going to be working synergistically alongside the main movers, that is the lats and the pecs and front delts respectively. So, In order for you to give your arms the best possible chance to grow effectively, you're gonna have to remove the main movers out of the picture. Now, what I'm about to say comes from my own training experience. Performance-based progress in major compound lifts does not automatically guarantee aesthetics progress in the secondary movers of set movements. All this sounds very complex and theoretical, but all I'm trying to say here is that the vast majority of people are going to have a very hard time getting bigger biceps by just getting stronger at pull-ups, or massive triceps by just focusing on getting stronger at dips and push-ups. Some outliers might be able to get away with it, but they are rather the exception and not the norm. I had learned this lesson the hard way. One of my biggest regrets at the start of my fitness journey was to not prioritize isolation work for my arms. So if we were talking about gymnastic rings, my go-to exercise for the biceps would be the ring curl. The initial setup is the same as the inverted row, but the joint dynamics are quite different. During a bodyweight row, the trainee wants to bring his elbows past his back, whereas during a curl, his elbows point forward. The former maximizes shoulder extension, the latter maximizes elbow flexion.
Heresy alert!
If you're still a beginner in these basic pushing movement patterns, gymnastic rings might not be the best tool for you to grow your triceps effectively.
What? What the f?
Are you okay? You're still there? Great. So let's set aside our emotional attachment to a particular training style or to a specific piece of equipment, and let's focus on reality and the facts. The three main movements promoted by the calisthenics community here on YouTube when it comes to triceps growth are typically dips, push-ups, and tricep extensions. Let's face it, a complete beginner is in all likelihood unable to complete a single one dip repetition on gymnastic rings. As a result, he'd have to settle for an isometric support position at the top, which is fine, great for the skill of lockout strength, but as far as we know, isotonic work is superior to isometrics when it comes to muscle growth. A feet-assisted regression of the ring dip or dips on parallel bars are much more beginner-friendly options for the triceps. But this muscle is still not fully challenged unless the movement is performed in a very specific way. So regular dips are just good to stimulate and strengthen your triceps, but highly overrated to grow the triceps unless you have a very particular anthropometry or achieve very high levels of strength. Most people are going to find that dips are great for both their front shoulders and lower chest, but kind of underwhelming for the muscular development of the triceps if that's all you do to grow that particular muscle group. Given the freedom of movement provided by the rings, trainees tend to express shoulder horizontal adduction much more freely. This translates into extra work for both the front delts and the pectoralis, which means that you are very likely to fail a set of ring push-ups because of either of these two, not because your triceps are getting smoked. For that to happen, I think beginners would do themselves a great favor if they were to spend most of their time on either close grip push-ups or what I like to call a bodyweight JM press on a straight bar. The first one is a very popular push-up variation, and you could find many videos about it here on YouTube, but the second one hasn't reached the same level of notoriety. Instead, the Sphinx push-up is what most people end up going for, but the setup for beginners on the floor massively shortens the range of motion at the most lengthened position of the triceps. I personally don't like that, so I came up with a solution to solve this shortcoming by performing the Sphinx push-up on a bar. This is a push-up that is born out of the need to create a version that minimizes the contribution of the pecs and shoulders, but still maximizes elbow flexion at the bottom. If you want a complete technique breakdown on how to perform this exercise correctly, check out this video later on. And finally, I find myself looking at this great isolation movement for the triceps. And here, as a personal trainer, I need to be realistic about what's practical and what's not for the average beginner. Just to put things into perspective, I can count with the fingers of just one hand the amount of people I've met in person who can actually do this exercise properly. And these are neither your average Joe or beginners. So it'll be delusional for me to recommend ring tricep extensions to the typical Joe Schmo, because the typical Joe Schmo spends 10+ hours a day sitting on a chair, is extremely sedentary, stiff, and slightly overweight. That's my client base right there, and by extension, a reflection of modern society. So if I have to introduce some isolation work for the triceps at some point during the training, then I would much rather step outside of calisthenics to provide my clients with an easier option to go for. A simple pair of dumbbells could save many beginners from tons of frustration and lack of results over many months. For both triceps and biceps, I typically recommend using higher repetition numbers, somewhere between 10 to 15 reps for the most part. These are isolation lifts that beginners should train in the last third of their session after they are done with the basic multi-joint lifts. Once you're confident with your technique, you could pair two isolation movements together in a superset or even a giant set if you are ready for it and have the work capacity for it. Or you could go for a mixed approach like I show you in this video, where I paired compounds with isolation movements. At the end of the day, if your goal is hypertrophy, you want to find accumulation methods within the confines of your training session, and supersets or giant sets are great for that specific goal. That's why I constantly recommend those as soon as decent technique is secured in all of the movements involved. Hey, I'm thinking about making a third and last part of this series where I focus on core exercises. But for that to happen, this video needs to get at least 25 thumbs up for me to know that you guys are interested in the topic. So,
smash.
It's getting dark outside. I really hope you found a ton of value in this video. If you did, check out the first video of this series on ring training for beginners. I think you're gonna like it. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to click on the bell to get notified every time a new video goes live. Stay fit, stay strong, help me raise an army of Super Saiyans all around the world. Peace.